Today on the Transplant Helper, we're going to be discussing a somewhat controversial topic, and that is the question, should I get a flu shot pre and post transplant? Stay tuned. Welcome to the Transplant Helper, folks. My name is Jim Merle, and today we're discussing a somewhat controversial topic, and that is, should I get a flu shot pre and post-transplant? Now, there are various opinions out there on this. As a matter of fact, you can search the internet all day long and get varied opinions on it, but when you boil it all down, run it through a funnel and see what's left, basically you have the answer yes. And we're going to be supporting that answer here in just a few moments with some things that we say as we divide today's discussion into three major categories. We're first going to talk about the reasoning. That is the reasoning behind why some people claim that they do not get the flu shot. Second, we're going to get to the meat of our discussion today, and that is, what about the recommendations? What's actually recommended by the majority of transplant centers, keeping in mind that all may be a little bit different, but what's actually recommended and how far do those recommendations go? And then finally, we'll talk for just a moment about the results. What seems to be the overall results of those who get the flu shot versus those who don't? So let's just hang in there to the end and go through the entire discussion. Let's first start out with that idea of the reasoning. That is the reasoning behind why someone would say, I'm not about to get the flu shot. As a matter of fact, I posted something the other day on Facebook about this in several different transplant groups and just simply asked the question, have you already gotten or do you plan to get the flu shot? And I would probably say 95% of participants in that particular survey jumped right in and said, yes, I've either gotten it or I'm going to get it. I know better. I know I need it. But on the other side of that, well, there were maybe 3, 4, 5% of those people who just said simply, no, absolutely not. I don't take the flu shot. None of my family do. And a few comments like that. So what's the great divide? Why are people so divided on this subject, and why are we so different in it? Well, it's because it comes down to a matter of opinion at a point. It comes down to the way that we think about these vaccines, the way that we think about the potential of getting the flu, and whether or not we feel that it's going to affect us. So this is basically, and there are several things that are listed, but this is basically the top 3 or 4 things that I saw that people were saying about why they would not get it, or at least the things that you hear most commonly. Number one, people say they won't get the flu shot because they say, I'll get the flu anyway. I took the flu shot this year or that year or these number of years, and I always get the flu. Now, let's see if that's really true. If you go and do your research on that, they say that that is not actually the case. And probably what's happening, if that seems to be happening to you, are one of several things. Number one, what you're getting after the flu shot may not be the flu. You see, oftentimes doctors diagnose us with the flu, even though they come in the room and say, well, we did that kind of quickie flu test. It came back negative, but I still think you got the flu. Well, if they don't have any hard evidence that that's what's wrong with you, then maybe you don't have the flu. In the second place, we have to keep in mind and understand that even the makers of the vaccines themselves admit that once you take that flu shot, there's going to be a 10 to 14 day window there before that vaccine takes effect. And so maybe it's the case that you got that vaccine, and then sometime within that 10 to 14 day window, that's when you started to develop symptoms. And if it is the flu, it could be because that vaccine had not taken effect. Number two, and this is one I've said so many times myself, and that is, I don't want to take the flu shot because I always get the fake flu. That's what I call it, at least. I always feel crummy afterward. Now, that doesn't always seem to be the case, but I think there have been several times in my past where I've honestly noticed I don't feel that well. And again, kind of like what I mentioned a moment ago, that can't really be the truth, because if this vaccine takes that 10 to 14 days again to take effect, then how can I blame it the next day, or how can I blame it 2 days later? Now, let me add to that, though, that if you'll actually read the document, which I'm going to show it in a moment and talk about it, but if you'll actually read the document that comes along with that flu shot, and they're by law supposed to hand you that, or at least offer it to you, you'll find out it says on that document that this shot may have some side effects. This particular vaccine may cause some symptoms. And so, although it's not necessarily the full-blown flu, you may have a feeling of a feverish feeling, an achy feeling, and there's a lot more to that you can look at for yourself if you've had one, or just go down to a local pharmacy or your doctor and ask them for one of those papers. Let's read over it before we make our final decision. Now, in the next case, there are a lot of people who honestly just say, I'm scared. I'm afraid to get that vaccine because I've seen so much about how it can cause this disease or that disease, or how it's got mercury in it. And the list goes on and on, the accusations and sometimes the myths that go against the flu vaccine. And I understand where you're coming from. As a matter of fact, I went and got mine, I think about a week and a half ago. Got that paper. I think I may have thrown it away before I left the doctor's office. And then today I took one of my children to get theirs. And when I did that, I got the paper in hand, and it made me think, you really ought to read over that. And so I've got a paper right here in my hand, front and back, top to bottom, full of things that we need to know about the flu vaccine. And let me just read the headings to you as best I can. And I'll sympathize with you. I can see why someone might be afraid of this vaccine. Whether these things are always true or not, let's read across it. Number one, the question is asked, why be vaccinated? Well, that doesn't cause any fear. Number two, it talks about the inactive versus basically the active flu vaccines. And by the way, if you're a transplant patient, you need the inactive. You need the dead virus. Do not get the live virus. The live virus will kill you, okay? You don't want that. The third category on here, it says some people, here's the one that really catches you to begin with, some people who should not get this vaccine. And I won't read through it, but it talks about a group of people, several groups of people who are advised totally against getting this vaccine. Now, you may or may not fall into that category, but the problem is if you read the heading number 3 right here on this paper, if you don't read it, you don't know if you're in it or not. You just kind of get nervous and back off. Turn the page over. There's a whole nother side. Risk of a vaccine reaction. Well, that causes panic and hoarseness, sore red, itchy eyes, cough, fever, aches, pains, itchiness, fatigue. And it talks about how these things can go on for days and how the problems can get worse and worse. That's heading number 4. Heading number 5, what if there's serious reactions? What should you do? And it talks about going to the emergency room, calling 911, possibilities of having difficulty breathing, fainting, all these things. And then number 6 says that there's a national, now this one will knock your feet off, knock your socks off. There's actually a national vaccine injury compensation program. Now here's my head scratcher. If this vaccine won't hurt you, and it's safe to take, why is there an entire compensation program been set up by apparently some form of government? It actually says the HRSA.gov. Why is there a whole entity of our government set up to compensate people for being injured? I don't know, but it's on the paper. And then finally here, number 7, how can I learn more? And guess what? The numbers and the web addresses go to the CDC, or basically the Center of the Disease Control. So you think CDC? I don't want any part of that. I understand. That's why I'm saying I understand that some people say I'm scared. I don't want to get it. But do your own research on that. That's not really what this program is about. But do your own research on that, and you'll find out. Yes, they give you this warning sheet, but what you don't realize is with every single medication you pick up at the pharmacist, they probably gave you 3 or 4 or 5 pages of warnings and risk and side effects with that you threw away and didn't even read. So this may not be any different. So don't worry about that. So that's one of the other reasons why people say, I don't get the vaccine. Either they claim they get the flu, they feel like they have the flu, or they're just simply scared of the shot itself, the vaccination itself. And then here's another category, and I'll admit I've fallen into this one a time or two. The idea that this is all just a big conspiracy. It's all just a scam. It's a way of getting our money and such. And here's what I've thought about since then. I think this is what we really need to be considering. If these big pharmaceutical companies, pharma companies, were pushing the flu shot in a way of making millions or billions, whatever you accuse them, wouldn't it be smarter to not give us a vaccine that might prevent something like this? let us end up in the hospital, because I mean, you can spend thousands upon thousands of dollars in the hospital in just a few hours versus maybe out of pocket spending what, $25 for a flu shot. Come on, folks. If they wanted to make money, I think they'd make more money by not making vaccines, by not making preventives. I mean, why not continue to let us have diseases like polio and you know, all these other debilitating things that we pretty much eradicated years ago? And so I don't know that there's that much of a conspiracy. So that's enough time spent on that. That's probably more time than you wanted. And by the way, that is the reasoning. And there are many, many more reasons why people give for not getting. But that's the basic ones. I think I get the flu. I feel crummy after I do. I'm afraid of the vaccine itself, or it's all just a scam. Well, set that aside for a moment. Let's talk now about the most important part of this and really what this whole program is about. What about the recommendations? What about the recommendations? Now, I use the word recommendations because when I was on Facebook the other day, and I've seen this before, don't get me wrong, but when I was on Facebook the other day in this discussion, someone, I didn't put it up, but someone said, you have to get the flu shot. It's required by our transplant centers. And another person took offense to that quickly. And they said, no way, there's no way that your transplant center, that your doctor can make you do anything. Well, in a sense, that's very, very true. No doubt about it. That's very true. At the end of the day, your health care is in your hands, period. However, and I don't want to push this too far, so please don't take it farther than I do. We need to keep in mind that as transplant patients, whether you remember it or realize it or not, when you sign up to be on the transplant list, whether you're transplanted yet or not, makes no difference. But when you sign up to be on the transplant list, you actually signed some papers that said you are going to agree to be compliant. Compliant. That means cooperate. And you actually signed papers that said that if at any point during your treatment you became non-compliant, that is, you don't want to cooperate. You don't want to, now it doesn't mean you can't, skip around here or there, but you don't want to do the vast majority of what your doctors, your coordinators, your transplant centers ask of you. Pre-transplant, at least, they can refuse to even list you, or they can even set it up to where you're off the list. And I don't know how far that goes, so please don't argue with me. I just know what they told me and what I turn around and I have to regurgitate or teach the patients now. You have to be compliant for the most part. Now, post-transplant, I don't know what in the world they're going to do to you, but I'll tell you this. There was a time in my life when I was not exercising properly. And although my doctor didn't throw me off the list, she taught me a lesson. She taught me a lesson. When I couldn't tell her how much I was walking and exercising every day, she said, okay, I'll tell you what. She said, you go to cardiac rehab for 12 weeks, and when you finish that, come back and I'll treat you. Okay, lesson learned. So you need to be compliant. Now, what about the actual recommendations then, requirement or recommendations that are set up? Now, these things are not set up by your transplant center or by your doctor. Your coordinator does not dream these things up. They only turn and repeat things to you typically that are actually already set up by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. The Cleveland Clinic is one good resource for finding this information. The Mayo Clinic, which everyone has heard of. These institutions do a ton of research to try to determine that if just for this one example, if transplant patients pre or post need the flu shot, or if they would benefit from the flu shot, or what would occur if they did not get that vaccination. And so they do some research, and here's basically what you're supposed to be told. Now, your transplant center might tell you something different. I'm not arguing with them either. I'm just telling you these are the basic recommendations. These are the set standards. And so if you've heard something different, word of mouth changes. The old game, gossip, where you whisper something in someone's ear and then they tell someone who tells someone. Time you get around the room, it's different. Maybe that's what's happened. I don't know. But I'll tell you this. The main recommendations come down to this. Pre-transplant, that's the first category. Pre-transplant, anyone being listed for transplant, pre-transplant, over 6 months old, that seems young, but over 6 months old, is recommended that they get the flu vaccine. So anyone over 6 months old, that's one category. Second category, Post-transplant, anyone over 6 months old, it's recommended that they get the flu vaccine. Now, see, that pretty much covers everything. Pre-transplant, it is recommended. Post-transplant, it is also recommended, should be, and is by the CDC at least, that we get our flu vaccines. Now, again, that may very well may be your choice, but that's what they suggest. Now, in the next case, family members of those who are pre or post-transplant, it is recommended that they also get the flu vaccine. Now, this isn't obvious, but let me state this. If you go out, and like I have, if I go out and get the flu vaccine, like I did a week and a half ago, and then none of my family, which I've got 7 family members, none of my family members, 5 of which are children, do not get flu vaccines, what are the chances I may get exposed? They're a lot higher than normal. As a matter of fact, the CDC says, and I understand this goes against some of what I've said, but the CDC says that in order for the society, they don't use the word society, but anyway, in order for society to really have protection against the flu, they need 80 to 90% vaccination rates. Generally, the best they get is 48%. With all the media, all the push, all the hype, they get about 48% of the population. So you can understand that. But nonetheless, it is recommended that pre-transplant patients get it, post-transplant patients get it, those family members get it, all of them. And here's something that blew my mind. And I actually saw some people talking about this the other day, and I'm totally with them, okay? Someone asked, how long after transplant should I wait before getting the flu vaccine? Well, the general answer, and it's what I've told people before, is you should wait about a year. You know, you got to wait for your immune system to put forth a little effort, for your immune system to start back to working, for you to recover, that sort of thing. So wait about a year. Actually, check this out. Actually, the CDC recommends that anyone who's 1 month post-transplant can get the flu vaccine. 1 month post-transplant can get the flu vaccine. Now, I'll admit I'm kind of scared of that, but you know, they say it'll work. 1 month post-transplant can get the flu vaccine. So let me use some logic there, though. You understand, like I do, and I'm talking about the United States, and it's different region per region. And of course, every season is different too. But basically, the flu season goes around my parts from about November-ish to say mid-February, early March. That's kind of the season. So they recommend that you have your flu vaccine prior to that. That's why I got mine basically second week of September. Or no, I guess first week of September. Anyway, you have to get it 10 to 14 days, or some would suggest a month to 6 weeks ahead of the season starting in order for it to be most effective. And so don't think this through too much and say, well, like I did, I got my heart transplant in May, that I needed to wait till June, then in June go get a flu shot. Nah, that's not necessary. That's not flu season necessarily. And so if the flu season is coming around again, and it lines up, say someone gets a transplant in August, then by September, if you'd like to get a flu shot, according to the CDC, please ask your transplant team. Please don't go against anything they recommend. But the CDC says you can have a flu shot. Now, that shocks me. That surprises me. But that's what they say. So keep those things in mind. Now, here's one more thing we want to add to that. And I know I just held up 2 fingers. But here's one more thing we didn't want to add to that, or an additional thing. And that is that anyone, of course, we're all immunosuppressed. That's why this matters as much as it does. But anyone who's been going through some additional immunosuppression therapies, such as, say, for example, you're early on in the process, maybe you just getting started post-transplant, you're on a high level of immunosuppression, you're on a higher level of antibiotics and that sort of thing, or anyone who's going through an additional treatment, like you've been through a little rejection, like 80% of us will go through in the first year. That's the statistic now. say you've been going through a little bit of rejection and they've had to up your immunosuppressants, or they've had to actually give you some IV immunosuppressants and that sort of thing. It's recommended that after that treatment completes, and saying it's flu season, that if you're going to have the flu vaccine, you need to have two of them, like an infant would. That is, you have one flu vaccine, wait 1 month, have an additional one or a booster, and that's the way to really make it effective. So I didn't know that, and I'm sharing that with you now because I didn't know that. So if you've been going through some additional immunosuppressant treatments, check with your doctor. He may suggest, and CDC would even, that you get two of those, one, and then wait a month and get a booster in order to increase the effectiveness. Now, with that said, we talked about some of the reasoning. We're not going to go back through that. We talked about some of the recommendations. What are the results? Friends, all in all, let's be honest with this. Whether or not this vaccine totally prevents all cases of flu, and they admit it doesn't, even the makers admit it doesn't, whether or not it does or not, if you can keep from getting the flu yourself just this one time, or by chance cut your chances in half or better of getting the flu this one time, I promise you'll be better off. Friends, I've had things, I'll just say it like we say it in the South, I've had things whip my hind in, make me deathly sick that wouldn't have hurt the person next to me. And so I certainly don't want something that can be as traumatic and tragic, even in some cases, as the flu. And I'll be honest with this too, I've lost good friends in the transplant world who seemingly were doing great and who were healthy. I'm not saying that whether or not they got the vaccine or not, I don't know, but I know they've died with flus and pneumonias and that sort of things, and I just have to wonder, is there any way that could have been prevented? Now, again, your opinions may vary and differ on this. I understand that. That's why I said it was a controversial subject, but I hope the information I've shared with you today has been accurate. I'll try to link some documents beneath in the show notes and such as that, maybe a video or two up here in the corner, and let you watch that. See what other people are saying, especially people who matter, because I'm not a medical doctor. I don't really know about this stuff other than the research I can do and the feedback I get from you. But if this program has helped you in any way, how about like, subscribe, share, and please comment below. I want to know your thoughts, whether it's yay or nay, yes or no. I want to know your thoughts. Tell me what you think about getting the flu vaccine, whether you're getting it or not, or why you wouldn't. And please keep it kind, keep it nice, but let's comment below and get our community going on this subject. As I say always, until next time, stay stronger, friends.